Hello everyone, welcome back to Spider-Man Page by Page. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Fancy Dan.
And today, Fancy Dan and I are tackling The Amazing Spider-Man number 10. And Dan has been really excited about this issue. He cannot shut up about the Enforcers. And now that I've read this, I can understand why.
The Enforcers are like the goofiest thing ever, and I love them. Part of the reason I like them so much, too, is because of the way they're used in Spectacular Spider-Man. So the big man is Tombstone in that show, and the Enforcers start off as, like, nobodies, just like they kind of are here, and eventually they upgrade their tech, and, like, Montana becomes the Shocker, Fancy Dan becomes Ricochet, and I think the Ox becomes the Rhino, so, like, they combine characters, and they're really awesome in that show.
That's so smart. I haven't watched far enough to see, or if I did, I forgot about it.
Yeah, they do some really cool things within that show. So after watching that, I've always liked them as, like, kind of cool, obscure Spider-Man villains, because they're kind of cool.
Well, so they actually call them what they are in this, but then they become other characters that are more well-known. That's cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that one of the goofiest things we've seen so far in this book is simultaneously in the most involved issue so far.
That's right, yeah. This is kind of where we start developing the ongoing continuity, especially the Peter's relationship with Betty, that continues into the next issue here and into the one after that. There's an ongoing Doc Ock plot that starts in the next issue too. So we're kind of getting into the era of Spider-Man being a very long ongoing story, rather than being one and done issues where he fights a villain, and, like, Peter Parker's life continues, but not so much for a lot of the other characters involved.
Yeah, and there's a lot more callback already to continuity.
Exactly, yeah. So this is, in my mind, where the book kind of starts to hit its stride and be kind of like the, typical Spider-Man formula. Like, we get in these couple of, I think it's at the end of this issue, we get some character development for Gino Jameson. We kind of reveal his motivation for hating Spider-Man so much and stuff like that. So we get into the heads of some of these other characters here, which is nice.
Yeah, and looking right away at the splash page at the front, it's kind of interesting. I mean, Stanley is always saying things like this, but on that splash page, it says, "With this classic tale, the Marvel Age of Comics reaches a new plateau of greatness." I finally agree with one of these.
Yeah, obviously it's a gag, but I think it's almost unintentionally on point here. I love the gag that we start off with in the first panel of the next page when we go on to there. I laughed out loud at Stanley's narration. He has some pretty good ones to this.
Yeah, I don't know if he's saying new plateau of greatness because of the format shift, or if he just likes to make a big deal out of the grandness of every story, regardless of how grand it is, and he does that in the panel you're talking about.
Yes, he does.
So we have your look at the splash page. We have your what becomes really classic mystery with a Spider-Man story, where there's a big bad guy behind everything that's wearing a mask, and we're trying to figure out who it is. This time we find out at the end of an issue. We tend to take a long time with these.
Yes, the big man is kind of the prototype that the Green Goblin becomes later on. He's introduced in 14. Which is, not too far from here.
Oh, wow.
And obviously the Green Goblin mystery goes on for much, much longer, but he kind of has the same deal. He wants to consolidate all of the crime in New York City under his rule and be, like, the big boss of crime in New York. Obviously, that changes later on as the vendetta between the two of them gets more personal. But, yeah, a lot of the early kind of mob boss Spider-Man villains have the same goal, and Doc Ock even talks about that, as we'll see in the next issue. So
in this, it plays more like a Scooby-Doo mystery, really.
Yeah, I was reminded of that quite a lot, especially at the end.
When he says, "If it hadn't been for a yada yada," yeah. Yeah. Did you want to talk any more about the splash page, or should we go ahead and get right into the story?
Let's hop right into it.
Okay, so talk about that first panel, because it is pretty great.
So it says, if you've read this far, which is the first panel, you're hooked. And I was like, oh, Stanley, that's funny.
Yeah, because I would make the case this is a pretty good jumping on point.
Yeah, especially, it does a pretty good job of establishing like where everyone is at, like Peter Parker in his life, Aunt May, Betty, all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, because, and obviously I'm saying this retroactively, but if you're used to Spider-Man being an ongoing kind of soap opera, and you go back and you start with the first couple issues, you actually could be the opposite could happen from what Stan Lee is claiming in this first panel. And again, that's with prior knowledge of the character, but you could find yourself being put off. I would, now that I've read this and the issue after it, I would almost think to tell like veteran Spider-Man readers that have not read the classic stuff to start with this issue.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely start with the Amazing Fantasy, the origin, and then skip right to this and not miss all that much. I mean, you'd miss, like, the initial, like, meeting between Betty and stuff, and those moments are cool, with him, Betty, and those moments are cool. There's some cool moments worth reading there, but I think this is where it starts to really get great.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons I'm saying that, too, is because right away you'd understand the dynamic with Jameson and Spider-Man better, and it wouldn't play just as a joke every issue.
That's true, yeah.
And we've been talking about that a lot. I did not, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but I didn't expect the book to come right out and give us something more layered than that. I really thought that was just going to keep playing as a gag forever.
Yeah, I kind of didn't remember that we were exploring the dimension of Jameson as a character this early, and
yeah, because you were trying to you were trying to figure out if there was more to it than that too, and I was like, oh, I guess Dan forgot about this part.
Yeah, and it's great to see them thinking about those sort of things this early. It's great.
So on this first page, we are introducing the big man. Spider-Man tries to nab this thief on a pole, and he screws up and ends up getting taken up into a helicopter. There was a trap that was sprung for him, and everybody's on the ground kind of pointing and laughing at him.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about this issue, it does kind of play out like a Scooby-Doo like mystery villain story, but the thing that I like about it is that it turns the tropes, not just of that, but of the typical like superhero like rounding up the mystery bad guy thing on its head in the way that like a lot of these Spider-Man early stories have, where like the initial confrontation where he meets the bad guy, he screws up, and he doesn't even know who the bad guy is really at the end. He thinks it's someone else. I mean, picture like the typical ending of a Batman issue of this kind. Like Batman would be like, oh, Commissioner Gordon, like, based on all the evidence I've compiled, I've brilliantly deduced who the bad guy is, and you couldn't because you're competent.
Yeah, there'd be an expository sequence at the end.
And Spider-Man, like, thinks it's Jameson the whole time, even though he thinks there isn't really much of a motive here. He does say that a couple times as he's, investigating things, but he doesn't get it right.
Well, and at the very end, he really thinks that that's probably got to be who it is. Nothing else makes any sense. And you're right. Spider-Man's not a detective. And Stan Lee still has a really keen understanding of this character and where he is at this point in his superhero career. We're really gradually building him into a more professional type superhero, and he's playing to his strengths, and that's just not one of them yet.
Yeah, exactly. And Peter Parker does get better at this, like as we see like some of the stories in the '80s when Peter Parker is doing investigative work, not on the level that like Batman does things, but like just investigating like crime scenes and stuff. He does get better at it, but here he definitely has no idea what he's doing.
So the idea here with Big Man is he ends up taking over basically all of the crime syndicate, like all of the various crime bosses and their gangs in the city, because he has these 3 guys that will beat you up if you don't agree to join him.
Yeah, and,
I don't know where he found these people. Like, this whole thing kind of breaks down once you find out who he is. Like I said, it plays out sort of like a Scooby-Doo story, which we should mention. This predates that.
Yes, that's right.
I think that's an important thing to bring up. I'm pretty sure that this is a few years before that, and so it doesn't feel like it's one of those until the unmasking.
Right, and I mean, just the concept of these 3 characters is the goofiest thing in the world, perhaps because they're not as themed as some of the other villains. Like, Fancy Dan is just a, like, really small guy that does karate.
Yeah. And I love the phrase "the coveted black belt" and entitled to wear the coveted black belt.
Yeah, they make a really big deal out of it, which is funny. And Montana's just like a wrangler in a business suit.
Yeah, and the ox is just a big ox. Like, literally, almost, like what you think of when you use that phrase. So the other gangs don't have people like this?
I guess not.
At all? I mean, obviously, Fancy Dan and the rodeo guy, like, those are pretty hilarious skill sets to be in a gang.
Yeah.
But again, where did he find these guys? How are other gangs not just big enough to be able to? I mean, at least somebody tries to pull out a gun and shoot Montana. But I figure enough guns, and you're not going to take over the entire New York crime syndicate.
Hey, I mean, Montana's pretty fast with that lasso. He could disarm people pretty fast. I don't know. See, what we really need here is Enforce's Secret Origin, or the Marvel equivalent of such line.
Yeah.
Where we explore the deep and intricate backstories of these three characters. How did they become friends and gangsters? I don't know. And
again, where did this guy who works at a newspaper find them?
Yeah, that's a good question too.
We'll get more to that when we get to when we get to him and what he's doing. But like that seems like an afterthought to me from Stan Lee. I don't know if that was a plant in the first place.
Yeah, and
there are no clues. There are really no breadcrumbs, right?
Right, and it's interesting to think as well about the rumored reasons as to why Steve Ditko left Spider-Man. It's time to reveal Green Goblin's identity. A lot of people say that Ditko left because he wanted it to be a more realistic thing. We talked about this a little bit before, that Peter wouldn't know the person was behind the mask. And here in this one-off story, that's exactly what it is. It's a guy that works in the same newspaper office as Peter, and it doesn't really make all that much sense.
Yeah. Not really at all. Well, again, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Let's obviously go ahead and talk about the Aunt May blood transfusion thing. So she's got to have surgery, or she's had surgery. She needs a blood transfusion, and the doctor asks Peter what his blood type is, and we act like he's the only person that can give her blood, and he's afraid of what it'll do to her because it's radioactive spider blood. Yeah. So I have to question his logic here just a little bit, because it's played conveniently where the doctor tests the blood and Peter's like, oh, good thing they didn't notice anything about the radioactive spider stuff in my blood, and of course it's a difficult choice for him, of course, because he has to try to save face and not let people know that he's Spider-Man, and he has to try to do the right thing so that he can save his aunt. But at the same time, it seems a lot more risky, even with like I like the personal risk he takes in letting the doctor look at his blood, but just because they don't find anything doesn't mean that she doesn't end up with spider powers. Or something. Yeah,
that's what I was thinking. I'm kind of surprised that no writer has ever kind of like backdoor used this story as a way to like have Aunt May manifest spider powers briefly or something.
You sure could. Yeah, because even after they say that they didn't find anything in the blood, I really expected something to go wrong.
Yeah, me too. And it's really funny to me, like, because some of these stories are fast-paced, to just get to some of the action bits. Yeah. He hesitates about giving her the blood for all of about 2 seconds, and he's like, "You're right, Flash and Liz, I have to do it," and then he just does it.
Yeah. Although, to be fair, in that moment, again, he's got to do something because he wouldn't be able to think of a good excuse.
Yeah, that's true.
For why not to, and they're both like, "What? That's your aunt. What is wrong with you?" Yeah, and he's like, "Oh crap."
Yeah, that's true.
But his motivation in that panel doesn't seem to be that as much as it is just because he says, "No matter what, I can't fail Aunt May." I'm like, well, this could be a lot worse. You don't know it yet, but you're gonna end up with 6 arms down the road, dude. Like.
See, maybe this is why Aunt May perpetually looks 90 and has been alive for all this time.
Yeah, now
she's got superpower low key.
Now she's got like a slight healing factor. It keeps her young. It keeps her not young, but not dead.
Yeah, exactly.
So he basically just dodges a bullet there, and it's kind of hilarious.
It is hilarious, and all of this leads up to the grand panel where we see the floating Big Man head.
Yeah,
which is awesome.
Yeah, which, again, makes him feel a lot more sinister and grandiose than he ultimately turns out to be. Like, he's a little bit of a looming force for a while.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've watched Spectacular Spider-Man up until the point where they introduce the Big Man, where he's Tombstone, but he's totally that in that show. He's a big looming presence that's like the main big bad for a while in that show. And they definitely looked at like his first appearance here and were like, let's actually do that.
That's so cool. I know I'm going to appreciate that show a lot more after reading these with you.
Yeah, we should do something on that show at some point.
We've always talked about it, and I just bought it. I have all of it now.
Oh, then we definitely should. Yeah. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, you decide what a good place to, during page by page would be to start working on that.
Okay. Maybe we'll start doing it when Ramita starts drawing. I mean, that'll be a little while. That's not till like issue 38, but
yeah,
I don't know.
We'll see how quickly we can get there.
All right, cool.
Because if they do a lot with these early issues, I'd love to be able to use that to inform that show.
Oh, they do. It's awesome.
So on to the next page, Dan.
Yeah, and we have the beginnings of the suspicions about J. Jonah Jameson.
Mm-hmm.
He's thinking that Spider-Man is involved in this caper, of course. And it's as ridiculous as it seems, but I like that we kind of frame this issue, at least the Jameson parts, with him kind of being totally irrational as you see him, and then give a dimension to the character and explanation of that later on. It's awesome.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that, of course, when we get to the end and we get to those panels, but Jameson, as you say, it seems ridiculous that he would think that, but it turns out he doesn't actually think that.
Yes, exactly. And he knows it, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, it's certainly still over the top. Like, you'd think that he would have drawn a line maybe before this where he wouldn't be risking his reputation as far as he is in the entirety of his paper.
Yeah, that's true.
but I do like that. Going on to the next page, I guess is where this this exchange happens. But he brings in his like senior, best reporter, who is the guy who's going to turn out to be the big bad guy, and I question all of that so much. It's hilarious. But again, more stuff we'll talk about when we get to those pages. But he rationally asked the question, well, do you think this is a good idea, given that you claimed Spider-Man last issue was Electro? And that's the place where I'm like, oh, we are really starting to keep more track of our continuity and build on those things.
That's right. This whole page is kind of a demonstration of that, because we're now getting to see why Betty has reservations about Peter going into danger so much, as we demonstrated in the past couple issues, why she's keeping secrets from him. I mean, that doesn't pay off fully until the next issue where we meet her brother and all that stuff. But the beginnings, the seeds of the payoff is happening here, which is cool.
And I like this kind of reversal with Betty Brant and Peter Parker, where she's basically doing the very same thing he is and keeping his dual identity in trying to protect the people he cares about, in lying to him about what's going on with the loan and why she doesn't want him to get involved with the crime syndicate. I keep wanting to call the big man Big Head for whatever reason. And so she's so she lies to him and or at least deflects and tries to say that there's nothing going on when obviously something is, and because she's afraid that Peter will go and get involved and try to bail her out, which next issue as Spider-Man is exactly what he'll do.
Yes, and one of the things I've always liked about Betty Brant as a character is that when she's introduced, she seems like kind of, prototypical like nice girl. She's she's got a career going for her, like she's a good girl, but like there's also she has a kind of dark side to her too, and she's kind of involved in this criminal shady underworld, not of her own choice. It's kind of like it's a similar sort of thing with how Peter like got involved with the wrestling and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I don't know, like I always thought that was an interesting dynamic to the relationship, because obviously like Gwen Stacy is like the perfect girl. Mary Jane's a party girl, but she's not like involved in the criminal underworld at all.
No, you're right. I never thought of Betty Brant is almost a foil for Spider-Man in that way, or a parallel. Like if she had gotten the spider powers, she could end up being a superhero just like him.
She could, yeah. And I like that she's trying to put Peter first in not revealing this stuff for him. It's the same reason why Peter feels like he can't reveal his secret to her. Because he thinks that, the other people will be hurt if you reveal the secret to anyone he cares about.
Yeah, on this page you can almost imagine her also with a mask on one side of her face.
Yes, you could. That's right.
And of course we're using that trick to good effect all through this. Yes. Through this page. I like that it's on 3 panels in a row like that, where he's thinking, Spider-Man thoughts at the same time as he's in his Peter Parker guise, where he can't, he can't jump in and be Spider-Man right now, but he's using his spider sense, and he's as always thinking about trying to keep that dual identity.
That's right. And one of the things that I loved about Rick Remender's Venom book, the way that wrapped up, is he went back to all of this early stuff with Betty Brant, especially pulls from stuff in the next issue we'll talk about when we get there. But he builds on a lot of the early stuff that's done with Betty here and her involvement in the criminal underworld and the kind of shady past that she has, and I loved that for it because it grew from all of this early stuff.
Yeah, and it's important to mention, because we've been giving this issue a lot of credit for keeping track of continuity so well and calling back to stuff, but this is a mystery that has been building for a while.
It has been, yes.
With her for at least, 2 or 3 issues?
Yes, it has.
So this bit where Spider-Man grabs this thug to get information out of him, I think is kind of fun. He kind of half turns into Batman for a minute, where he's like, oh, I've got to intimidate this guy. I got to be scarier than his boss. And then on the next page, he makes a big giant spider out of spiderwebbing.
Which is really funny because it's kind of like a Batman thing to have like the themed animal around you. To intimidate people, but it's totally Spider-Man in that it's like a fake one made from leftover webbing,
Yeah, there's really no way on earth this guy could get hurt. He's not, it's a complete bluff. It's a goofy bluff.
Like Batman in Begins, for example, he has that like thing in his boot that like calls like real bats to make it look really theatrical. Spider-Man's like, all right, I'm gonna take this piece of wood and some old webbing. I'm gonna put it because like that's all he can afford to do. Like he doesn't really know how to intimidate people. I don't know. It's really fun.
Yeah, but it's also resourceful. I mean, it would maybe work. I mean, I like that he's playing into some kind of perceived mysticism. That's a thing that we haven't really talked about much in these issues so far, is what people really think Spider-Man is, because they live in a world with superpowers and stuff, but Spider-Man is a little bit more mysterious than, he's much more mysterious than the Fantastic Four. Like, everybody knows everything about them.
That's true. He's even more mysterious than, the Avengers characters to a large degree.
Yeah. And this is one of the only books early on that deals very much with dual identity.
That's right, yeah.
And I just like the idea of a character that people see sort of like Batman, where he's almost an urban legend, even though people know for sure that Spider-Man has to exist. But he's like a shady character, but his personality is not that at all.
Yeah, and I think the perception of him as a mysterious, shady character obviously comes from Jameson's newspaper,
That's
too.
That's a good point, yeah.
That kind of plays in the whole thing.
And it happens kind of naturally just based on what he has to do, as opposed to what he's trying to make people think, because he doesn't have much control over that. Partly because of
Yes,
resources,
exactly.
partly because of lack of experience, partly because of just dumb luck.
Right. He's not like the Fantastic Four where he can hold press conferences and, talk about, make his case.
So then at the end of the scene, he finally meets up with the Enforcers and starts trying to take them down. And we, as we always do with this book, make a big deal out of it at the beginning. Like, oh no, how's he going to defeat the Enforcers? And I'm like, well, he got through Doctor Doom. He got through Dr. Octopus. I'm not really worried about him here so much.
But has he ever fought anyone with the coveted black belt? I think not.
I think not. The Ox is pretty big. I don't know.
Yeah. I love the Enforcer. Like, just that image of that first panel of Fancy Dan. He looks like he's dancing, and it's awesome.
Yeah. If you put sound effects to this book, not like onomatopoeia written on the page, but you just, while you're reading it, started putting sound effects on, there's no way this guy isn't like, whah! Just everywhere.
Oh, yeah, that would be awesome.
He's like, whah!
And it would be set to 70s funk music.
Oh, yes, naturally. Even though such a thing did not exist yet.
Exactly, but look at him, he's in a purple suit.
Now, to be fair, Stan Lee is trying really hard to make a good case for these guys being a force to be reckoned with by the fact that by the end of this fight, Spider-Man has to run away. He doesn't actually dispatch of them right away.
That's true. And just because, we don't know much about these people, I think they seem really goofy, but, these are mob enforcers. These have got to be ruthless people, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and because it's a, lighthearted book that is partly intended for kids to read, they're obviously not doing really scary things. All of that would be off panel. I mean, you have to assume these guys have probably murdered people.
See, I think these should have been the villains for the Amazing Spider-Man, gritty reboot that they did, instead of Wizard. They would have fit perfectly.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, honestly, the more I'm looking at this, the three of them being able to take Spider-Man on the first time out, I can buy more than Big Man taking over the whole, every part of the mob with them. That's a bridge too far.
Yeah. And this is before Wilson Fisk comes on the scene, so, it's kind of acceptable.
Yeah, well, and this is kind of the proto-Kingpin.
Yeah, a lot of the early Spider-Man villains have the ambition to kind of be the Kingpin. Yeah.
Well, we should probably note that this is, unless I'm forgetting one, isn't this the first time that it's been Spider-Man up against just the mob?
I think so, yeah. I mean, there have been mobsters he's fought, but not the entire organized crime apparatus.
Yeah, it's usually been costume villains, and maybe just a dude with a gun.
Right. Yeah.
Thugs
Exactly.
and things. So we're getting back into some of our soap opera territory on this next page. I mean, Stan Lee's just getting and Ditko, of course, getting so much done on one page compared to earlier issues, I think, where you got Spider-Man, following Jameson around, trying to decide if he's the bad guy, and then dealing with Betty Brant and trying to figure out what's wrong with her and what he can do to help. All of that drama on one page is, more than we were getting before.
Yeah, they use 2/3 of a page to tell a lot of story. It's really skillfully done. I agree.
I also like that we don't stretch this out any farther than we do. That she does actually go ahead and pick up the phone. I didn't think she would do that.
What are you talking about? I wanted this to be a 5-page arc. I mean, a 5-issue arc. It should be real decompressed.
Oh yeah, is that you
wallowing self-pity for 5 issues?
Yeah, well, maybe at some point, we can have Bendis come back and revisit this.
Bendis' Spider-Man is great, though.
No, I know it is.
I can't crap on Bendis too much.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, so
I haven't been reading this stuff lately. I've heard it's been real slow.
It depends on the book, but yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, let's move on, shall we? Okay, so now we've got the what is this guy's name? The
Frederick
Foswell. Yeah, Foswell. He is kind of trying to, I think, deflect suspicion some on this page where he's acting like all he cares about is his paycheck and the bottom line, and that, you know, he would love to have journalistic integrity, but he's got to keep his job. And of course, what he actually wants, I guess, is to control everything, although I don't see even a remote inkling in his personality that he is this super ambitious guy. Like, he's got to be the best actor in the universe.
Yeah, maybe he's like Peter Parker in that you wouldn't expect that guy to be Spider-Man either.
I guess, and I mean, we don't see this Foswell guy for that's giving it too much credit. Well, because we don't see this Foswell guy for his. Well, okay, I'm not looking at your face right now, so I can't tell if you're being facetious in any way. But with Peter Parker, you know, we see him kind of playing both sides, where, you know, he cares about his reputation as Peter Parker to some degree initially, and then slowly he starts to kind of make a fool out of himself so that the Spider-Man persona can work out. And you could say, well, this Foswell guy is older, maybe he's more experienced, but he's just now doing this big man thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you pulled this together so fast. This does not feel like a one-issue thing in that regard.
See, we need a miniseries about the big man and the enforcers.
we need a prequel miniseries that establishes. Yeah.
See, if somebody had went through with their Spider-Man cinematic universe, we could have got that.
As its awesome own film.
Yes, that would have been amazing.
You know, you and I defined the word awesome, I think, in different ways.
Hey, I would be there opening night. I would have bought my tickets already. That would have been awesome.
So anyway, Peter Parker is kind of down in the dumps, sitting on his couch here, trying to decide if there's any way that Betty has just run off because she doesn't care about him anymore. Which I imagine is a thing that a lot of girls will think about him down the line.
That's right, yeah. That is true. Even in initial conversations he has, Gwen, when they first meet, she can't stand Peter because he's going through some really tough times and he won't give her the time of day. She tries to, like, not make advances at him, just, like, chat with him casually, and he won't even talk to her. And she's like, there's something wrong with this guy. Why is he giving me the cold shoulder all the time? I can't stand him. He's terrible. And there, you know, as they get closer, there'll definitely be, you know, things like that as well, where he is gone for days, and they're like, wow, I guess he doesn't care.
Yeah, and that's the fresh, more real world stuff that Stan Lee brought to comic books.
Agreed. Yeah.
Because that happens in real life, of course, all the time. How do you know what a person is going through?
Oh, yeah, of course.
And how many people that you can't imagine you would begin to sympathize with that you think are total jerks or deplorable human beings, if you spend a day in their shoes, that you would suddenly, you know, maybe you wouldn't condone some of the things that they do, but you'd suddenly be more sympathetic to how they got there.
Right, exactly. And that's why I love Green Goblin as a villain so much, because he's the same sort of thing. Like, he's a completely evil human being, but, like, you can sort of sympathize him in that, like, he can't. Norman Osborn doesn't really have control over most of his actions because he's insane, you know? Great.
And that's why in fiction, sympathizing with a character is all about getting in their head and understanding how they got there, even if you don't like that person. And,
exactly.
And so, you know, you can appreciate a character, a protagonist, even if nobody else in the story around them does, because you understand them.
Right, exactly. And they nailed that perfectly with the stuff.
So what do you think about Peter Parker's plan to get kidnapped by the enforcers?
It's kind of funny. I don't think he completely thinks through, like, obviously the situation worked out where, like, they wouldn't have went back to investigate whether Peter Parker was still in the cell or not. But, like,
that's true.
Wouldn't that draw some suspicion on their part? Like, if Spider-Man, like, showed up and then simultaneously someone noticed that Peter Parker was in his cell, you know?
Well, just even before that, I guess I kind of like the idea that he is putting himself on the line of the way he does, because he talks about how risky it is. And I like that he's not so naive to think that this is just going to work out because he's Spider-Man. Like, he is somewhat past a lot of that really early naivete, I think, where
yes,
he was so in over his head, and he still gets in over his head, certainly. And even in this situation, he kind of does to a degree, but it's not hubris. It's he's like, I like the personal stakes here. Like, he's doing this more for Betty than he is anything else.
Right, he's kind of at the end of his rope. He doesn't know what else to do.
Yeah. And but what I kind of wonder on the side of Big Man and the Enforcers is why they don't just check him out first and see if he's not just making up stuff.
Because maniacal monsters don't do subtlety.
Oh,
monster.
Oh, okay, yeah. But it's really silly. Well, and also Peter Parker's kind of lucky that they even find out about it.
Yeah, he is. That's true.
Some guy on the street overhears him. He's like, "Ooh, I bet they'd pay big money to find this guy who claims he knows who they are." And then they could just send an undercover agent to, like, feel him out. And if they don't think he knows anything, then they would just leave it alone. Like, he's just some high school kid. But then I guess the deal is, since Big Man knows Peter Parker in his regular everyday life, he has reason to maybe think there's more to it than that. Because if it was just some random high school kid,
yeah,
like they're probably wasting their time.
Right, and you never really get the sense of, like, exactly how much of everything the Big Man controls in the city. Like, he just has, like, a random informant there, like, on the street. Is that, like, happenstance, or does he have people everywhere?
Well, but that's not even an informant. It's just a dude. Yeah. He just said the enforcers ought to pay plenty for that tip. It's just some old man who needs money.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think he's already working for them, probably.
I don't know. That's a good question. Now, we need an origin story for that guy, too.
Would you stop it? Dan wants a 40-film franchise just giving the backstories of all these characters that we never got.
See, I was reading an article the other day. Did you know that Sinister Six would have been in theaters by now if they continued with their plans?
Oh, how crazy is that? That's a really great point. Yeah. It just doesn't... It feels like yesterday that I did a log saying, hey, this movie's supposed to happen. And now we've already had Spider-Man in Civil War, and we've got Homecoming next year. Wow. It's just... Time flies, man.
Yeah, it does. I still kind of wish they made that movie, but anyway.
Yeah. We've had this conversation 150 times, but I agree with you. Okay, so as you said, Spider-Man gets out of the cell, and now he has his second round with the Enforcers.
Yes, he does. And I do like that, like you said, he realizes he's kind of outmatched. He's kind of fighting all of the leaders of the mob in one place. And even though they're regular dudes, like, he realizes that he could get overwhelmed just by the sheer force of numbers.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and actually that's kind of interesting because before he got kind of bested by just the three of them, and now there's actually a bunch of other guys there too.
Yeah, exactly.
I like what he does with the car here.
Yeah, I was going to say he's going to have to use his mad driving skills to overcome this problem.
I've always wanted to drive one of these sporty jobs. For a second, I was like, is he going to run people over? And then he just opens the doors and smacks them. And
yeah, I kind of thought that initially too. I was like, this is dangerous.
I have no idea how fast he's driving. I don't know how there's that much room inside this warehouse because they're not outside, or are they outside? Are they in an alley? Where are they?
They're in a warehouse.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, because I saw it. Okay, I was right the first time because I saw lights on the ceiling and stuff, and I was like, okay, so he can't be going too fast then because he wouldn't have that much runway. If they were outside, I would really question Ox running up to the back and being able to catch this car.
Yeah, that's true.
And we also have a lot of your... And of course, there's other places I could bring this up, but I thought it was more glaring here than any other place in the issue with Stan Lee explaining things you're seeing, especially the oil drums coming down the ramp. I just don't need Spider-Man to tell me that's happening.
Yeah, that's true.
And then I stopped him for you, you clumsy oafs. Now get him. Like, I don't need all that. Like, just show me that action. It made me think that in the early days of comics, and of course, you know, this post Golden Age. I mean, we've had comics for a couple of decades now, but we're still at a time where I think even a lot of the people, and some of this, of course, is because we're writing for children to a degree, but because the medium is still relatively new, I think there's some there's some kind of fear about the weaknesses in the medium, where we're trying to make it feel as much like a movie as possible, but it is words and pictures, and so we're afraid that we can't be sure that Ditko is doing enough from panel to panel to create that kinetic motion.
Right, yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, Frank Miller talks about that all the time in interviews. I've seen him talk about how, like, you know, comics have always felt like they're kind of like the ugly stepchild of movies and, you know, prose.
Yeah.
But they can do some things better than both of those, and I agree with him. And this is kind of maybe, you know, showing that insecurity a bit, like you were talking about.
And that's the thing we talk about all the time, but I wanted to bring it up specifically in that panel because I felt like it jumped out at me there.
Yeah.
I like.
I do like the action way it's wrong here, though. Like, especially that panel with Spider-Man dodging the tires. So really
I was
nice.
just about to say that. Yeah, there's a lot of really dynamic action on this page.
Especially when he's jumping through the tire there.
Yeah,
you could totally up that and make him look like he was, you know, on the tire swing. That'd be pretty awesome.
Yeah, that should be a toy for children.
The Spider-Man tire swing, the toy you've all demanded.
So he's still trying to dispatch of these guys. This is a pretty long action scene.
Yes, it is.
But it's a lot of fun. I really like how this issue is paced. I mean, we like it's really talky toward the beginning, but it's all really engaging because, like I said, it's pretty involved. There's relatively decent intrigue there, and then we get this really fun action scene at the end.
Yeah, and I like that Stan Lee's confident enough that he doesn't have to sort of like poke fun at the fact that he's doing all the soap opera stuff and just trying to rush through it and get to the action, because we've seen that in previous issues where he's like, we know you came here for the action, but here's some story stuff that's going to set up the action scenes. Like, this really feels like the action and the soap opera story stuff are interconnected and woven together really well. Not that the other issues weren't like that, but he's not apologizing for it either.
Yeah, and this feels like a climax as opposed to obligatory action.
Exactly, yeah.
And so, you want that stuff to be fun, but you want it to be driven by the story. You want it to serve the story.
Exactly.
What do you think of how he used the spider signal?
I think it's pretty awesome. I hope they do stuff like that in Homecoming.
I wouldn't have thought that it generated a beam that bright.
Yeah.
But that's pretty cool. Like, this cop's like, the spider signal, I better call headquarters.
I love the wee sound effect that we have above the cars there.
Some of the stock dialogue is just great. I actually like Big Man's look a lot. I like his mask. It reminds me a little bit of False Face from 60s Batman.
Oh, I'm not aware of what False Face looks like. I've never seen that episode. But yeah, I agree with you. I do like the way he looks.
It's pretty creepy, and that's why it's disappointing at the end when you find out who he is, because he should have more gravitas than that.
Yeah, he should.
I mean, at the same time, maybe it's kind of fun to have a guy who creates that, because if you think about it, there is a parallel with Spider-Man there, where he's like doing it on purpose or otherwise. In the case of Spider-Man, he's manipulating perception. So, like, nobody would expect Spider-Man's just a high school kid, and nobody would expect that this guy is just a reporter. So it's a cool idea. Yeah, it just doesn't work for me at the end.
Mm-hmm. The thing I do like about I know I keep talking about Spectacular Spider-Man in this, but one of the things I love about the Enforcers comes to that show, but like, when you're talking about the big man's look, one of the things that I thought was really cool about what they did in that show was they took Tombstone, a character that has the physical skin appearance of what the big man's mask looks like he has like a white pale skin, and they just made it that character. I don't know, I just think that's a really cool idea, because the mask does, the way it looks does look kind of similar to Tombstone's face.
Yeah, and that's so smart, because this guy's ultimately so kind of nothing by the end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've got this scene here where Spider-Man's looking in the window. He thinks that he's got Jameson at the end of his rope. He's about to possibly, be taken by the police, because Jameson's looking nervous. He's kind of angry that he doesn't have any proof yet that Spider-Man is the big man. Spider-Man's thinking that Jameson's trying to frame him for the things that Jameson himself did, and then surprise!
Surprise! Yeah, I love the way this plays, where the police officer is like, we've caught our man, and Spider-Man's like, it's not him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really funny. One of the things that I thought was really weird about this sequence, I couldn't stop looking at this panel. It took me a little bit longer to read this issue just because of this one thing. It's really dumb. You're probably going to laugh at me for it.
Okay.
But look at the police officer that's holding the jacket and the shoe of the big man and compare the size of his body to the way, how large his arms and hands must be in comparison. They look gigantic.
Oh, you know what? But it's a weird perspective thing, because those are not the arms of the guy in the middle. They're the arms of the guy on the left.
I know. They still look gigantic to me.
Oh, really?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I don't think you would think that
like
if that guy wasn't there, though.
No, I'm telling you, I knew it was him when I first saw it, and his arms look like they'd hang down, like, past his knees, dude, if you put them at his side.
I guess you're right. Okay, that is really weird. They honestly should have just drawn one cop in that panel.
Yeah. It looks really strange.
Just did that to split well, I was going to say they did that to split up that dialogue. That's actually not Marvel method, so probably not, but...
Like, look at his hands. They're the size of the cop's face. I don't know. It's really weird.
Oh, no, it also just occurred to me that Foswell, that's his name, Foswell?
Yes.
Yeah, here it is. He looks like Don Knotts.
I don't know who that is.
Oh, Barney Fife in the Andy Griffith Show.
Okay.
That's who
cool.
It looks like. I really like this shot of this close-up of Spider-Man's face at the top right. That's probably one of my favorite panels in the issue.
Oh, yeah, it is awesome. You could totally make a meme out of that.
That's true. Just what we're doing with Shadow Rook there, I like a lot. Again, it reminds me of a lot of things I saw in the 90s, and I didn't expect to see the same kind of stylistic stuff done with Spider-Man's look in these early issues. It always surprises me how much of what I thought of as modern Spider-Man was actually throwback to this stuff.
Oh, yeah, and, like, think about the amount of times in the 90s show where Spider-Man is kind of, like, looking in on Jameson's office for something going on. I mean, they used to do that stuff in that show all the time.
Yeah. So, I, of course, can't help but say that we're laying this on pretty thick and kind of having Jameson spell everything out about his motivation, but I'm glad we finally get it.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it's a little ham-fisted, but I do appreciate that we are exploring his character a little bit. And this is kind of like how comics at the time were written, so I'm kind of willing to give it a little bit of a pass on that stuff.
Absolutely. I do have to question why now a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
I mean, he has gone quite a bit further. I like that this is, like, 2 issues in a row, he's kind of put everything he has on the line to try to make Spider-Man look bad, as we find out here, just so that he can feel better about himself. And I also like that he is in... So like, maybe I can kind of see him being pushed so far that now he's having this one-sided conversation with himself about it. Or maybe he's done this 100 times and Stanley has just now seen fit to show it to us. But, because it is a one-sided conversation. And that's part of what makes it feel so ham-fisted, is this is just Stanley going, well, I decided this is the issue where we'd find out, and I'm not sure how to present that to you. So he's just talking to himself.
Yeah, I think maybe it's like a compounding thing, because we did, like, call back to the fact that he's, like, risking the public, losing all respect for the paper because he's accused Spider-Man of all these things so many times. And now that he's looked really bad in the eyes of the public, like he was, saying that Spider-Man was the big man the entire time, and now that it's proven to be false, this is just another, slight against him, and he's finally breaking down and having a one-sided conversation with himself. But I don't know.
What I really like about it is that it's not making him, of course, actually feel better about himself. It's just making him feel worse.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, he's made a worse person, even in his own eyes, for trying to drag a good man down. Like, I really like that he comes right out and says, "I know Spider-Man's a good person. He's a hero. I wish I could be." It is like Lex Luthor with a conscience, right?
Yeah. it makes you, when you read all of this stuff, appreciate the take that Raimi did with the J.K. Simmons version in those movies, like in Spider-Man 2 when Spider-Man disappears. He kind of has the same exact revelation we have here, that Spider-Man was a hero and that the city needs him and stuff like that. And immediately, right when he steals his costume back, the light switch goes back on, because that's kind of what gives him drive and purpose. Yeah. Like, Spider-Man is the thing that makes Jameson get out of bed in the morning, have want to go to work and slander someone like that. That's like, Jameson does not exist without Spider-Man in this way.
Well, I also wonder if it doesn't become an almost weirdly noble endeavor, where it's like it's a role he fills. Like, it started from a place, and then it becomes, well, like, I'm a cog in this machine, and we need Spider-Man, and I don't know if there is a Spider-Man without me the way I've always done this to him, so I just let myself fall into that role.
Right, and like, there are times we'll see where, like, Peter Parker will question his convictions and be like, maybe Jameson's right. Like, is he actually the voice of reason and holding me responsible for making some of the choices I've made as Spider-Man? Like, am I actually making a difference, or am I making things worse?
Well, I'm sure down the road there will be places where Jameson will start to believe his own nonsense, because it starts to look less like nonsense when Spider-Man makes the bigger mistakes.
Exactly, yeah. He feels sort of validated and things like that, yeah. But this is kind of the reason why I've always considered Jameson to be one of the Spider-Man rogues, even though, he doesn't wear like a costume or fight Spider-Man, but he's kind of the yin to Spider-Man's yang in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and is able to be a foil that can be there every issue without putting a costume on, because that's a lot harder to do when you're talking about an arch nemesis that wears a costume.
Right, exactly.
So did you notice this thing at the end, setting up the next issue and promising that we're going to reveal the secret of Betty Brant and everything, that Stan Lee claims something that does not actually happen in the next issue, which is that we're supposed to meet a mysterious, dramatic, that we're supposed to meet a great new villain.
The only thing I can think of is the mobster guy, but he's not great.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, the next issue is mostly a Doctor Doom issue. A Dr. Octopus issue.
Yeah, maybe the original plan wasn't to have Dr. Octopus be in the next issue. Who knows?
That was really interesting.
Yeah, I would imagine, since they were kind of making these comics, flying by the seat of their pants a lot of the time, maybe the demand for Doc Ock to come back was so great that they wrote him into the story at the last minute or something.
Yeah, that's possible, and we'll obviously talk about it next time. But there's a thing right at the beginning that makes me think you might be right about that.
Yeah,
because the way we get him out of prison is pretty darn contrived, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Well, Dan, any final thoughts about this one?
I don't think so. I enjoyed this one quite a lot. It's one of my favorite ones from the very, very early stuff. So yeah, it was good.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's wonderfully involved. When you compare it to the last few that we've had, it's crazy that one of the goofiest things in this so far is in one of the most legitimately dramatic and engaging issues.
Yeah, and I love that Steve Ditko ends this issue with the Spider-Man Faces in the Sky thing. That will become a staple of his run on the book as we move forward. And in Spectacular Spider-Man, they end every episode with that as well, which is
that's
really cool.
One of those visual things I hope Homecoming finds a way to integrate.
Oh, I would. If they made that a movie poster, I would buy the crap out of that.
I mean, that would be a big deal. And I think you could do that without it seeming too silly.
Oh, yeah, I agree 100%.
Especially because it is high school Spider-Man, so you want the style of that movie to reflect his personality a little bit. And what we've seen with him so far, he is kind of this version to at least some degree. Or at least I can see him going to some of those silly places. And does he do the light thing?
What do you mean the light thing? Like, he has...
Like I think he has the spider signal.
Yeah, he does. In the post credits, the post credit sequence for Civil War, after all the credits are over, is him turning it on
Yeah.
and on the ceiling, which is
I thought
amazing.
so
It was
because I still it's so dumb. I didn't stay that far, and I still haven't seen that.
Oh, if they have it online, you should watch it. I mean, for me, it's like the coolest thing ever. I don't know if you'll think it's like worth worth staying up the credits for.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I just
pretty...
fast forward and look at it. I bought it, but like I do
Oh,
this
okay,
all the
fair enough.
time.
Yeah,
I buy things the week they come out, and then I haven't gotten around to watching it yet.
Yeah, he in the post-credit sequence, it's kind of like a gift from Tony Stark. He gives it to him.
I remember you telling me this now. And that's why I hesitated, because I was like, I'm almost positive he has it, but I have not actually physically watched the scene.
Yes, it does happen. We can confirm.
Well, everybody, thanks as always for listening. We sure appreciate it, and hope you're enjoying the show. We will be back with you again next week with number 11, featuring the exciting return of Dr. Octopus. In the meantime, I am Captain Logan.
And I am Fancy Dan,
See you next time.
holder of the coveted black belt.
Bye.
in the chair.